The wind howled across the open plains of Poland, its bitter sting carrying the echoes of war. The morning sky was a dull, heavy gray, a blanket of clouds that offered no respite from the chaos unfolding below. It was September 1939, and the Luftwaffe, the Air Force of Nazi Germany, had been tasked with supporting the swift, terrifying advance of the Wehrmacht's panzer divisions. But as the tanks rumbled across the countryside, it was not the sleek, advanced fighters that would steal the limelight in these early days of the invasion. Instead, it was a relic, an outdated biplane that had somehow found new purpose on the unforgiving battlefield. Amidst the storm of modernity that had swept through the skies, the Henschel HS-123, an aircraft from an earlier era, dove low to the ground, its radial engine roaring as it unleashed its deadly payload. The plane's design was old-fashioned, its wings trailing wires, its fuselage boxy and utilitarian. The HS-123 was a biplane in an era that had moved on to monoplanes, its wood and metal construction a stark contrast to the sleek, cutting-edge technology being rolled out by the Luftwaffe's more glamorous aircraft. Yet, despite its humble origins, the HS-123 had proven to be unexpectedly effective, a brutal reminder of how war often rewards the unlikeliest of tools. On the ground, German ground forces watched in awe as the biplane tore through enemy positions, its bombs and machine gun fire creating havoc among the Polish defenders. Its maneuverability was unparalleled for such a low-flying craft, able to dodge fire and strike with pinpoint accuracy, an asset in the face of enemy resistance that was often overlooked by those who relied too heavily on speed and firepower alone. In the first days of the invasion, the HS-123's success would become undeniable. It was not just a relic, but a weapon that had adapted and excelled in its role as a close support aircraft, filling a gap that the more advanced planes struggled to manage. The origins of the Henschel HS-123 were rooted in a time before the war. In the early 1930s, when Germany was forbidden from developing advanced military aircraft by the Treaty of Versailles. In a world where air combat was still in its infancy, the HS-123 was conceived as a dive bomber, its design influenced by the need for precision bombing. The biplane's two wings provided the lift needed to support its relatively heavy bomb load, while its open cockpit offered the pilot the best possible view of the ground below. It was a straightforward, simple design, one that would prove to be more versatile than anyone had expected. By the time the Second World War began, the HS-123 was already considered obsolete by most of the Luftwaffe's high command. It was too slow, too vulnerable, and too old-fashioned to compete with the likes of the Henschel He-111 or the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka, aircraft that were faster, more heavily armed, and better suited to the fast-moving, high-tech warfare that had come to define the conflict. The HS-123 was relegated to second-tier units, its role often overshadowed by the more glamorous aircraft that dominated the skies. But in the brutal realities of the early days of the war, it was the HS-123 that found itself in demand, a humble workhorse that could deliver where the more advanced aircraft failed. In Poland, the HS-123 proved its worth in a way that no one had expected. The speed and power of the modern dive bombers and fighters were of little use when it came to the close support needed for the German ground forces. The HS-123, with its slow, deliberate pace, could get in close to the ground and deliver its payload with unerring accuracy. The biplane's ability to fly at low altitudes, often just above the treetops, made it a nightmare for Polish defenders, who were ill-equipped to counter such low-level attacks. The HS-123's presence on the front lines would continue to be felt throughout the campaign, as it provided invaluable support for the advancing German forces, creating confusion and destruction in its wake. The battle tactics employed by the Luftwaffe in the opening days of the war relied heavily on the principle of blitzkrieg, rapid, overwhelming force that would leave the enemy reeling and unable to mount a coherent defense. The HS-123 was an integral part of this strategy, its low-flying attacks perfectly suited to the fast-moving, hard-hitting approach that had become synonymous with German military doctrine. The biplane's ability to fly under the radar of enemy fighters and strike from unexpected angles made it an ideal asset for the Luftwaffe's ground support operations. As the campaign progressed, the HS-123 would continue to surprise its critics. Its role in Poland, and later in the early stages of the Battle of France, would demonstrate the unexpected effectiveness of the aircraft. While the more advanced German bombers and fighters gained most of the attention, it was the humble biplane that provided the steady, reliable support that was needed in the chaos of war. But as the war moved on, and new, more advanced aircraft entered the fray, the days of the HS-123 were numbered. Its limitations became more apparent as the conflict escalated, and by the end of the 1940s, the HS-123 had been retired from frontline service. Yet for a brief moment, it had played a crucial role in the success of the Luftwaffe's early operations, proving that sometimes the most unlikely weapons can turn the tide of war. It was a reminder that, in the end, it wasn't always the most advanced or powerful machine that triumphed on the battlefield, but the one that could adapt to the needs of the moment. And as the war raged on, the legend of the Luftwaffe's last biplane would live on, a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness that had made it a force to be reckoned with. The Henschel HS-123's success on the battlefield was not merely a stroke of luck. Its unexpected effectiveness can be traced back to its design, one that emphasized simplicity and functionality over speed and cutting-edge technology. While its biplane configuration may have seemed outdated in comparison to the more advanced monoplanes of the time, it was this very design that made it a master of close support, capable of delivering precise, devastating strikes in the most challenging conditions. As the war progressed, however, the initial surprise at the HS-123's performance began to give way to a deeper understanding of the technology and tactics that made it so valuable. The aircraft was powered by a BMW 132 radial engine, which produced a mere 750 horsepower. It was slow, but this was an asset rather than a liability. Its low speed allowed it to make accurate dives, to release bombs with great precision, and to evade enemy fighters that would struggle to catch it in its evasive maneuvers. The engine, while not the most powerful by modern standards, was reliable and easy to maintain in the field, an essential quality in the high-pressure, fast-paced environment of wartime operations. This reliance on simple, effective technology would be a hallmark of the HS-123 throughout its service life. Technical Manual TM 9294, 1943. In terms of armament, the HS-123 carried a 250-kilo bomb load, along with two 7.90mm MG-17 machine guns mounted in the wings. These machine guns, while not as powerful as those found on the more advanced fighters, provided effective suppressive fire, allowing the HS-123 to defend itself from attacking aircraft, while performing its primary task of ground support. The biplane's bomb load, while modest compared to the larger bombers in service, was more than enough to decimate enemy artillery positions, supply depots, and infantry positions. The HS-123's bombs would often strike with such precision that enemy forces would have little time to react before the next wave of attacks came. The ability to fly at low altitudes and deliver bombs with pinpoint accuracy was what set the HS-123 apart from other aircraft in the Luftwaffe's arsenal. But it wasn't just the aircraft's armament and design that made it effective. It was the way in which it was used. The Luftwaffe had adapted its tactics to the strengths of the HS-123, recognizing that the biplane's slow speed and low altitude could be leveraged to great effect. In the early days of the war, when the Germans were advancing rapidly through Poland and France, the HS-123 was used in hit-and-run attacks, often making multiple passes over enemy positions to soften them up for the advancing infantry. These tactics were in stark contrast to the heavy bombardment strategy employed by larger bombers like the Henschel He-111, which was less suited to low-level ground support. The HS-123 was also used in the suppression of enemy airfields. Its ability to fly under the radar of enemy fighters and strike at unexpected moments made it a valuable tool in this regard. In the early days of the war, when the Luftwaffe was establishing air superiority over the battlefield, the HS-123 would frequently attack enemy airfields with devastating results, catching ground crews and aircraft on the ground, destroying them before they had a chance to take off. The biplane's ability to perform such operations made it an essential part of the Luftwaffe's strategy, even as more advanced aircraft were rolled out. Despite the growing dominance of the Luftwaffe's more modern aircraft, the HS-123 continued to play a crucial role in the early stages of the war. In the Battle of France, the biplane was used to support German ground forces as they swept through the French countryside. The HS-123's ability to fly at low altitudes and provide immediate fire support for advancing infantry was a vital asset in the face of stiff French resistance. While the Germans had superior numbers and technology, it was the adaptability of the HS-123 that allowed it to continue to deliver results on the battlefield. Bureau of Ships Report, 1943. Yet as the war continued, the HS-123's shortcomings became more apparent. It was slow, vulnerable to enemy fighters, and lacked the firepower of more modern aircraft. Its inability to perform at higher altitudes meant that it was ill-suited for missions in more dynamic combat situations, such as air superiority operations or long-range strategic bombing. By the end of 1940, the HS-123 had been replaced in many roles by the more advanced Junkers Ju-87 Stuka, a dive bomber that was faster and more heavily armed. But the legacy of the HS-123 would not be forgotten. Its success on the battlefield had proven that in warfare, innovation could come from the unlikeliest of sources, and that sometimes simplicity could be just as effective as the most advanced technology. As the war moved into its later stages, the HS-123 was phased out, its role reduced to that of a training aircraft and a trainer for Luftwaffe pilots. But in its brief service life, it had made a lasting impact on the way ground support was conducted in modern warfare. The lessons learned from its success would shape the future of close air support, influencing the development of more advanced aircraft and tactics in the post-war years. The HS-123 may have been the Luftwaffe's last biplane, but it was also one of its most unexpectedly effective weapons, a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the engineers, pilots, and ground crews who made it a success. In the end, the Henschel HS-123's contribution to the Luftwaffe's early victories was undeniable. Its unexpected effectiveness, born of simplicity and innovation, had filled a gap in Germany's aerial capabilities during a crucial phase of the war. And though it would eventually be replaced by more advanced aircraft, the lessons learned from its service would influence the development of military aviation for years to come. It was a humble biplane, but in the right hands, it was a weapon of unmatched precision, a key factor in the Blitzkrieg that would forever change the face of warfare. The sudden effectiveness of the Henschel HS-123 in the early days of World War II can be attributed not just to the aircraft's raw capabilities, but to a strategic advantage that Germany had not fully appreciated before the war. This advantage, surprisingly, lay in the aircraft's role as a tactical support weapon, a designation that many had initially considered a relic. As the war raged on, it became clear that the biplane's unique design and capabilities were a decisive factor that outperformed expectations, even in the face of more advanced aircraft. The secret to the HS-123's success lay not only in its design, but also in its role within the broader air strategy of the Luftwaffe. The Germans had a vision for their air force, one that revolved around the rapid deployment of well-coordinated air and ground forces in support of the Blitzkrieg strategy. The HS-123, by design, was intended for close air support, a task that would become vital in the fast-paced, ground-level combat of the war. While the Stuka, with its precise dive-bombing capabilities, was the star of the show, the HS-123's ability to fly lower and slower provided a level of accuracy and versatility that no other aircraft could match. For all its faults, the HS-123 was capable of flying at altitudes so low that it remained out of the line of fire of enemy interceptors, a surprise feature that modern monoplane bombers and fighters had a hard time matching. The biplane's low and slow flying pattern made it ideal for targeting specific ground-based threats with deadly precision. The aircraft's bomb bay could carry light munitions, including 50-kilo bombs and incendiaries, to wreak havoc on infantry, artillery, and supply lines, essential elements of the rapid ground campaigns in Poland and France. Though it couldn't compete with the heavier payloads of more modern bombers, its accuracy made it far more effective in small, concentrated strikes. What also set the HS-123 apart from other aircraft was its ability to deliver those bombs directly onto target. The biplane's slow flying speed allowed it to make multiple passes over enemy positions without risking the sort of speedy escape that other bombers might need. This allowed the aircraft to effectively neutralize multiple threats in a single pass. It was a luxury other faster bombers could not afford, and this made the HS-123 an invaluable asset in the early days of the war, when close support was the highest priority. Despite the brilliance of the HS-123's design, there was still the issue of its sustainability on the battlefield. Early on, the Luftwaffe engineers realized that the aircraft's reliance on simplicity would also be its downfall in the long term. The HS-123's vulnerable open cockpit and slow flying speed made it a prime target for enemy fighters, especially as the war progressed and the Luftwaffe's opponents caught up in terms of air superiority. The aircraft's range, too, was limited by its modest fuel capacity, making it a poor choice for long-range missions, a key reason it was ultimately sidelined in favor of faster, more versatile aircraft. But the HS-123's real legacy wasn't in its ability to hold the line for long. Rather, its effectiveness came in its ability to perform in short bursts, delivering quick, brutal damage at close range. This precision became a hallmark of the Luftwaffe's early air operations in Poland, where the aircraft's bombings were often timed to strike in concert with infantry assaults. By 1940, as Germany advanced into France, the need for close support aircraft had only intensified, and the HS-123 was called upon more and more in these campaigns. In May 1940, during the Battle of France, the Henschel HS-123 showed just how much it could do for the Luftwaffe. The war had shifted in the favor of Germany's blitzkrieg tactics, but this also meant that support roles were now more important than ever. The HS-123 proved invaluable in striking enemy strongholds, artillery positions, and tanks, all while acting as a low-level aerial strafing weapon, obliterating targets with great efficiency. In the airspace above the advancing German forces, the biplane would often be seen weaving through low clouds on a mission to neutralize pockets of resistance. In one of the more telling moments of its operational effectiveness, the HS-123 flew under the radar of French fighters, using the dense foliage and terrain of the countryside to hide its approach. These tactics made the biplane one of the most feared weapons in the Luftwaffe's arsenal during its brief but effective time in service. Behind the HS-123's success was a team of engineers and technicians whose work made it a reality. The biplane's ability to withstand the rigors of close support combat was no accident. Designers at Henschel had made strategic decisions to ensure the aircraft could endure the stresses of low-altitude, high-risk attacks. The structure of the plane was reinforced to minimize the risk of damage from enemy fire, while its airframe was built with a careful balance between durability and weight. These were not luxury decisions. They were practical ones, born from the realities of war. And yet, despite its immediate success, the HS-123's role in the Luftwaffe's operations was always limited. The advent of faster, more capable bombers like the Ju-87 Stuka, and eventually the Focke-Wulf FW-190, relegated the HS-123 to a secondary role. Its brief but pivotal contribution during the first months of the war would soon give way to newer, more advanced machines. Yet for a time it had been the workhorse of the Luftwaffe's close air support operations. It would go on to serve as a training aircraft, and eventually be replaced in favor of more sophisticated options. But its impact during the early days of the war could not be understated. The story of the Henschel HS-123's success was one of adaptation. In a time when aircraft technology was advancing at an unprecedented rate, it was a biplane, a relic from an earlier era, that proved the most effective in the close support role. Its adaptability in the face of changing battlefield conditions, its ability to outsmart more modern aircraft, and its raw simplicity made it a formidable weapon in the Luftwaffe's arsenal. For a brief moment in time, the Henschel HS-123 became a symbol of the unexpected. It was a reminder that sometimes in warfare, it's not the flashiest weapons that win the day, but those that can adapt, endure, and strike with deadly precision.